I was sitting in a quiet hotel lobby in D.C. recently, talking to a guy who spent 3 decades drafting international trade agreements. He had this dog-eared copy of a decades-old treaty on the table, tapping it with a fountain pen, sounding almost poetic about the rules-based order. To him, these papers were the guardrails of civilization, the invisible lines that kept the peace. He spoke with a sort of hushed reverence, convinced that as long as the signatures held, the global system was secure. But then a notification flashed on his phone, one of those breaking alerts that vibrates with a specific kind of urgency. A major power had just unilaterally seized a strategic shipping lane and rerouted a fleet of tankers, citing nothing but immediate national interest. No legal preamble, no consultation with allies, no mention of the very treaties he was holding, just a direct physical assertion of will. The look on his face wasn't just shock, it was the expression of a man realizing he was holding a map to a city that had been demolished. He tried to start a sentence about multilateral frameworks, but his voice just trailed off as he stared at the screen. In that silence, you could practically feel the filter, that thin layer of law and diplomacy that usually sits between raw power and action, simply evaporating. What struck me wasn't the event itself, but the realization that the world isn't actually falling into chaos. Chaos implies a lack of a plan. What we're seeing instead is a very deliberate, very calculated repositioning of power. The old guardrails haven't just broken, they're being removed because they're in the way. We keep waiting for a single cinematic collapse of the global order, but the reality is much more subtle and much more permanent. We are entering an era where the logic of the treaty is being replaced by the logic of the leverage point. And if you think these headlines are just random noise, you're missing the new shape of the world being built right in front of us. Okay, so let's unpack this. That opening, it really frames the central tension in all the materials we looked at.
It really does.
We're seeing this shift from a global order that was, procedural, based on rules.
Based on paper.
Right, based on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And it's moving to one defined by material production, by industrial capacity, and the strategic use of economic leverage.
It's a fundamental change. And what's so fascinating about the sources is that they give us both sides of the coin.
How so?
Well, you get the high-level theory, the model explaining the constraints all modern states are dealing with.
Okay.
But then you also get the practical on-the-ground data, the actual industrial achievements that show how some states are, solving for those constraints.
So it's not just theory, it's a demonstrated reality. What strikes me is how the research frames this as a strategic transition.
Yes, from a Western procedural model to an Eastern result-oriented model.
And the results are physical things. The sources say that massive industrial output and port throughput are becoming the new foundation for, global stability.
It's the difference between a promise and a finished product. It's about the rise of state capacity and, crucially, infrastructure leverage.
So the argument is that the efficiency of your national mobilization in securing your own energy and supply chains has become more vital for your survival than any traditional alliance.
Precisely. If you control the factory and you control the shipping lane, you don't really need to ask a committee for permission.
So our mission for this deep dive is clear. We're connecting the dots.
Right.
Between this ambitious industrial planning, the new geopolitical tool of weaponizing the economy, and the fragmentation of the global system that results from it.
It's all about how control over tangible resources, advanced manufacturing, critical minerals is just becoming more important than abstract ideologies.
Exactly. The hard power of production is replacing the soft power of frameworks. To really get why that diplomat in the story was so shaken, we have to start with the theory, the bedrock of modern statecraft.
And the research gives us a really powerful tool for that. It's called the security trilemma.
It's not just some academic model, is it? It feels like the hidden operating system for every major policy decision today.
That's a great way to put it. It defines the structural limits of what a state can actually do.
So what are the 3 points of this trilemma?
Okay, so the trilemma identifies 3 objectives. They're all vital for a state to thrive, but, and this is the key, they're inherently contradictory. You can't maximize all 3 at the same time.
A classic trade-off. What's the first one?
The first is social security. This is the absolute foundation for domestic legitimacy.
And just to be clear, we're not just talking about pensions.
No, not at all. In this context, social security means the state's broad commitment to welfare, redistribution, social cohesion.
So universal public goods, healthcare, education.
Exactly. It's the government ensuring its people feel secure enough at home to accept the risks that come from engaging with the wider world. It's the domestic bargain.
Okay, so that's leg number 1. What's the second?
The second is trade security. This is just non-negotiable for modern prosperity.
Meaning stable and dependable access to foreign markets.
Yes, and even more importantly, access to crucial international supply chains. Think about everything from semiconductors for your phone to the precision tools you need for heavy industry.
And defense components, I assume.
Absolutely. The components vital for your own defense production are a huge part of trade security.
Okay, so social security, trade security. What's the third leg of the stool?
The third is the most traditional one, national security.
Your defense capacity. Your military.
Right. Your ability to deter aggression and project influence. And you can build that up yourself through massive domestic spending, or you can get it reinforced through alliances like NATO.
So where does the trilemma, the conflict, come in?
It emerges because resources are finite. When geopolitical tensions rise, trying to maximize everything at once becomes impossible.
You can't have a huge military, generous social spending, and a completely open, globalized economy all at the same time.
The trade-offs become binding. You have to choose.
Now, I think we need to slow down here because the sources make a really critical distinction about who feels this constraint and how.
That's a crucial point. It's not an equal opportunity constraint.
Right. So for a nation that lacks monetary sovereignty, say one that has to borrow in dollars or euros,
for them, the trilemma is a very real fiscal problem. They can literally run out of money.
they have to make painful choices, like cutting social programs to pay foreign debt.
Exactly. But for a nation with monetary sovereignty, like the United States,
The constraint isn't fiscal, it's political.
it's purely a political choice. They could theoretically fund all three. So deciding to allocate resources to one area is always a political decision to not allocate them somewhere else.
And this brings us right to the classic guns versus butter trade-off.
It's the perfect illustration of the trilemma in action.
If you ramp up military spending, the guns, you're actively diverting resources.
And it's not just money. You're pulling skilled labor, top-tier R&D, and industrial capacity away from the civilian economy.
Away from the butter things like healthcare and education.
Right. The research is very clear on this. Military spending has a disproportionately negative effect on the growth of the civilian sector. It's a zero-sum game that creates immediate political tension at home.
You can see these choices playing out historically, too.
Yeah.
The example of post-World War II Western Europe is fascinating.
They made a very clear, very deliberate choice, didn't they?
And a massive one. They prioritized social and trade security.
And strategically delegated national security. They essentially offloaded the immense cost and burden of their core defense onto the NATO alliance and, really, the U.S. security guarantee.
And that freed up their national capacity to focus on building these incredible welfare states and the deep economic integration that became the EU.
They could focus on butter because someone else was providing the guns.
And this wasn't just a convenient policy choice. The sources argue it was actually a prerequisite for globalization itself.
Yes, through this concept of embedded liberalism.
Okay, let's break that down because it can sound a bit academic. What does it mean for you, the listener?
Embedded liberalism just means that opening your borders to global trade and competition was only politically possible because the state was simultaneously promising to protect its citizens from the downsides.
So the government basically says, okay, we're going to open our factories to global competition, and some of you might lose your jobs.
But in exchange, we promise you a comprehensive social safety net, generous unemployment benefits, job retraining, universal health care.
The welfare state was the cushion. It compensated for the risks of being open to the world, which made globalization politically survivable.
The two are structurally interdependent. Without the social safety net, citizens would have demanded protectionism. The welfare state made that unnecessary.
But that entire delicate balance, it rested on the assumption of a stable, benign global security situation.
An assumption that is rapidly dissolving.
Which takes us directly to the new reality, the shift from the so-called peace dividend to the weaponization of interdependence.
The old liberal idea was that if we all trade with each other, if our economies are all deeply interconnected, nobody would risk starting a conflict.
The complexity of the system was supposed to guarantee peace.
Right. That was the peace dividend. But now we see that those global economic networks are not neutral. They're not flat platforms. They have hubs. And those pivotal hubs are controlled by powerful states.
And they're being used for strategic advantage. So the very complexity that was meant to secure peace is now the thing that enables coercion.
Precisely.
So what does this new arsenal of weaponized interdependence actually look like?
It's expanded way beyond just putting an embargo on a finished product. The goal now is to inflict pain at the very base of a country's industry and technology.
Okay, so give us an example.
Well, you have sophisticated financial statecraft. This leverages the central role of the US dollar and Western financial systems to impose costs on rivals.
Freezing assets, cutting off access to markets.
Exactly. Then you have highly strategic export controls. These aren't about blocking T-shirts. They target pivotal technologies, like the specialized equipment needed to manufacture advanced semiconductors.
The goal being to cripple a competitor's future industrial and military power.
Correct. And finally, there's supply chain securitization. This means focusing on and controlling critical choke points.
Like rare earth minerals or precision tooling.
Yes. The goal is to transform trade openness from a tool for mutual growth into a tool for geopolitical coercion. It completely blurs the line between economic security and national security.
And this blurring creates a huge paradox, especially in the defense sector itself.
It really does. National security, which you'd think is the ultimate expression of a state's independence, actually relies paradoxically on these multilateral global systems.
Why is that?
The economics of modern military production are just brutal. You have incredibly high R&D costs, rapid technological obsolescence, and short lifespans for these systems.
The F-35 fighter jet program is the classic example here.
The cost of developing and sustaining a program like that is more than the entire national budget of most countries. It's just prohibitively expensive. This creates a highly concentrated global arms market.
So even if a middle power tries to build its own defense industry, they rarely achieve true independence.
That's right. Their industries get integrated into these global supply chains. They might co-produce a part or get a partial technology transfer, but that just creates a long-term reliance on the core producers for the most advanced components, the software, the upgrades.
They become, as the sources say, peripheral nodes in someone else's network.
Let's look at Turkey as a real-world example of this constraint. They invest a huge amount in their own defense industry. Drones, ships. It's a clear priority.
But their exclusion from the F-35 program and their continued dependence on American and European suppliers for things like advanced jet engines.
It underscores the structural limits. Without secure access to those allied technologies, their own national security goals are structurally incomplete. They can't go it alone.
And that's the feedback loop, isn't it? The more you see this kind of economic coercion, the more it forces targets and even bystanders to start building alternatives.
Exactly. They start trying to secure their own materials, develop their own financial systems, bring production back home.
Which in turn just accelerates the very fragmentation of the global order everyone is talking about. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of decoupling. So we've laid out the theoretical why. The trilemma forces these hard choices, and weaponized interdependence makes the old system dangerous.
Right.
Now we have to shift to the material reality of how a new form of power is being built. This is where we see what the sources call the result-oriented model in action.
And that model is all about using massive industrial output as the new physical foundation for state capacity.
It's where the efficiency of national mobilization really becomes a form of global leverage.
It is. The industrial achievements detailed in the research are just stunning. They show that tangible production capacity is now a more powerful tool than any abstract diplomatic framework.
So where should we start? What's the best example?
I think we have to start with the most visible global success story. The new energy vehicle, or NEV, sector.
The scale and the speed here are just hard to comprehend. The data shows they hit all their key targets for EVs, hybrids, even fuel-efficient gasoline cars, way ahead of schedule.
And that goal of selling 3 million indigenous NEVs, they hit that in 2021.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. In 2020, the entire global EV market was 3 million cars, total.
And just 1 year later, China produced and sold more than that domestically.
The growth of a single company like BYD really tells the story.
It's the perfect illustration. In 2015, they sold about 69,000 NEVs.
Okay.
By 2024, that number was 4.2 million.
Wow. That's not just growth. That's an industrial explosion. So how did they do it? Was it just a case of throwing money at the problem?
No, it was much more strategic than that. The sources identified two absolutely critical keys to this success. The first was vertical integration and indigenous control.
Meaning it wasn't about just assembling imported parts?
It was about ensuring they controlled the entire production line from start to finish, especially the most valuable and sensitive parts of the car, the batteries and the critical minerals that go into them.
So what did that vertical integration look like on the ground?
Well, between 2015 and 2019, the central government had a simple rule. If you're an EV maker and you want subsidies, you have to use Chinese-made batteries.
That's a powerful incentive.
It guaranteed a massive, secure domestic market for their battery makers, like CATL and BYD. It allowed them to scale up incredibly quickly.
And it forced them to secure their own supply chains.
Critically, yes. It pushed the battery manufacturers to integrate upstream into the processing of minerals like lithium and graphite. By controlling everything from the raw material to the finished battery pack, they made their supply chain immune to foreign coercion.
That is a masterclass in strategic industrial policy. You secure your domestic market and you insulate yourself from weaponized interdependence at the same time.
And that was just the first key. The second was the calibrated supply and demand side support.
Meaning they didn't just help the companies build the cars.
They made sure there was an immediate, robust market of people ready to buy them.
How did they support that market?
On the supply side, firms got the works. Subsidies, grants, cheap land, discounted energy, tons of funding.
And on the demand side?
For consumers, they made it really attractive. Tax exemptions, rebates, and even fast-tracked license plate registration, which is a huge deal in major cities.
And I read that local governments were mandated to buy electric buses and taxis.
Yes, which guaranteed a foundational level of sales volume from day one. They even incentivized foreign companies like Tesla to localize their supply chains, which helped build up the entire local manufacturing ecosystem.
So you combine a secure supply chain with guaranteed demand, and the result is what the research calls a second China shock.
That's right. That 62% global EV market share in 2024 is a monumental shift. It means they're now dictating pricing, setting production standards, and driving the technological direction of the entire industry.
And what does that feel like in other parts of the world?
In Europe, their market share went from less than 1% to over 8% in just 4 years. And that single data point, BYD outselling Tesla in Europe for the first time in April 2025, that's a physical validation of this whole result-oriented model. The material success has turned into real market control.
Let's move to another area that's just as critical for long-term state capacity: energy and electrical equipment.
If NEVs are the new consumer product, this is the literal sinew of a modern industrial economy, and the successes here are just as impressive.
Especially in renewables.
Especially in renewables. Take solar. By 2023, China commanded at least 80% market share in every single sector of the solar supply chain.
Wait, 80% in each sector. So from the raw polysilicon to the wafers, the cells, and the final module.
In every single one. That's up from less than 50% just a few years ago. That's total vertical dominance.
How do you even achieve that level of consolidation so quickly?
By leveraging massive economies of scale and creating industrial clusters. Government loans made capital cheap, and local governments actively pushed for supply chain integration by creating these huge industrial parks.
I think the sources mentioned one provincial government actually forcing out existing businesses to make room for an integrated solar company and all its suppliers.
That shows you the level of coordinated national mobilization we're talking about. It's all focused on the end result.
And that rapid mobilization is what allowed them to hit their domestic solar and wind installation target of 1,200 gigawatts 6 years ahead of schedule. That's a staggering amount of power.
We see the same story in wind, where 6 of the world's top 10 turbine makers are now Chinese, controlling over 60% of the global market.
In nuclear power.
They're prioritizing it for long-term energy security. They're bringing new reactors online faster than any other country on Earth.
How fast did we toss you?
They went from 18 reactors to 55 in just 10 years, and they have 22 more under construction right now, which is almost half of all the new nuclear reactors being built globally.
And critically, they've indigenized the technology.
Yes, their first indigenous reactor, with over 85% Chinese components and domestic IP, came online in 2020. It's all about securing supply, minimizing foreign reliance, and maximizing their own energy resilience.
And this material power, it doesn't just stop at generating electricity. It extends to the grid itself, the transmission leverage.
This is where state capacity becomes true geopolitical leverage. If you control how the energy moves, you control the system.
The sources say Chinese firms have a 99% market share for ultra-high voltage, or UHV, power line components.
And they've built about 90% of all the UHV lines in the world. This allows them to export their technical standards and their technology globally.
And this ties right back to the NEV's success story, doesn't it? The battery technology is transferable.
Seamlessly. CATL, the battery giant, is now leveraging its EV expertise to build grid-scale energy storage systems. They already hold over 40% of that global market.
So you've got massive renewable generation, dominant UHV transmission, and market-leading storage capacity.
It's a tangible, result-oriented foundation for national resilience that is very hard to compete with.
And finally, let's touch on the hard infrastructure that underpins all global trade: maritime and advanced rail.
In 2024, China dominated global shipbuilding. And what's interesting is they started moving into high-value markets like LNG tankers, which had always been South Korea's territory.
So controlling the ports, the logistics, and now the actual vessels that move the goods.
It is material leverage in its purest form.
And the high-speed rail network is another incredible example of national mobilization.
In advanced rail equipment, they develop trains that can go 350 kilometers per hour, and they're already deploying 400-kilometer technology.
The scale of the network is just immense.
It more than doubled between 2015 and 2023. We're talking nearly 28,000 miles of track. That accounts for almost all of the new high-speed rail built anywhere in the world during that time.
And how did they build that capacity so quickly?
It was a classic strategy. They required foreign companies to transfer key technologies to Chinese joint venture partners as a condition of getting access to the market.
You use your market access as leverage to get the tech, then you rapidly indigenize it and scale it up.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that while the sources say the rail industry struggled to get high overseas sales revenue,
only about 16% of their rolling stock revenue came from abroad.
Right. But the industry has been successfully leveraged for pure geopolitical goals.
And this is the critical point for you, the listener, to understand. The goal wasn't maximizing profit.
The goal was maximizing influence.
These high-profile rail projects are the marquee successes of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Correct. Chinese rail companies secured major contracts all through Africa and Southeast Asia. These projects create deep economic interdependence and geopolitical influence.
Which is a form of leverage that a signed piece of paper, a treaty, simply cannot match. It's hard, physical infrastructure replacing abstract diplomatic power. So everything we've talked about so far paints a picture of massive, targeted success. But a real deep dive has to look at the other side.
Absolutely.
We have to look at the areas where these structural barriers prove too strong. Even for this result-oriented model, this is the necessary counterpoint.
And this section really validates the complexity of the security trilemma. It shows that even with this incredible national mobilization, securing both trade security and national security at the same time is intensely difficult in some sectors.
Especially in high-tech or research-heavy industries.
Yes, these are the areas where decades of accumulated intellectual property and trade secrets held by established foreign firms create these really hard-to-breach choke points.
A great place to start is the high-end manufacturing gap, specifically with computer numerically controlled or CNC machines.
These are the bedrock of all precision manufacturing. If you can't make these machines at the highest level, you can't make advanced jet engines, sophisticated defense components, or complex medical devices.
And the ambition here, under the MIC 2025 plan, was very high.
The goal was an 80% domestic market share by 2025.
And the reality?
The reality was about 33%, a significant share, but nowhere near the target. And the real gap is in the high-tier market.
You mean the most advanced machines with 4 or more axes of movement, the ones you need for the highest precision work in aerospace?
Exactly. They started with only about 8% of that highest tier, and while they successfully doubled that to 16%, it's still far from the dominance we saw in, say, NEV batteries.
So why does that dependence persist?
Because foreign firms still completely dominate the high-end components that make that precision possible.
Who are we talking about?
Japanese firms like Fanuc and Mitsubishi and Germany's Siemens, together they control around 69% of the Chinese CNC market.
And if you dig even deeper into the guts of the machine,
foreign firms control 90% of China's market for high-end ball screws. That's a critical component that determines the machine's precision and its lifespan.
The analogy is clear. You can build the car's body, but you're still importing the engine and the transmission.
And that leads to a profit problem. Chinese firms do dominate the low and mid-tier market, but they're mostly competing on cost,
which crushes their profit margins.
In some cases, profits plunged by over 76% in 2024. They can achieve volume, but not the profitable, high-value technological leadership. So while they've been a net exporter of these machines since 2021, that success is often because foreign firms set up production in China, not because of a purely indigenous breakthrough in the most advanced areas.
And that structural reliance on foreign components is a perfect example of a choke point that can be weaponized.
It is.
Let's shift to another critical dual-use sector, aviation and aerospace.
This is where ambition ran headlong into the hard reality of accumulated IP and, just as importantly, international regulatory barriers.
The goals for their mainline passenger jet, the C919, were very aggressive.
And they fell short. The delivery was delayed by 3 years, from 2020 to 2023.
And it's only captured about 7% of the domestic market versus a 10% target. But the more fundamental issue, according to the sources, is the engine.
Yes, the indigenous C919 engine, the CJ1000A, is still in the trial phase. Without a fully certified, high-performance domestic engine, the entire project remains highly dependent on foreign suppliers.
Which makes it incredibly vulnerable to any disruption in trade security.
And that technological gap translates directly into a geopolitical limitation.
You're talking about the lack of international airworthiness certifications.
Exactly. The C919 can't fly in U.S. or European airspace because the FAA and the EU's Aviation Safety Agency won't certify it until 2028 at the earliest.
Which effectively insulates the entrenched incumbents, Boeing and Airbus, from any competition in the most valuable global markets.
It's a perfect example of how abstract-sounding rules and certifications become very real, material barriers to entry when they're backed by established powers.
And yet, they did find some success in the smaller regional jet market with the C909. How does that fit in?
It doesn't contradict the difficulty of high-end IP, but it does show how persistent state-backed development can still carve out a market.
So even though the C909 had, inferior range and fuel consumption compared to its competitors?
It still secured orders from non-Chinese airlines and completed its first international flight in 2025. And more importantly, once C909 delivery started, Chinese airlines simply stopped buying foreign regional jets.
Which forced a major competitor, the Brazilian company Embraer, to close its factory in China.
So even without immediate technological supremacy, you can use guaranteed procurement and consistent development to achieve market dominance and push out competition, at least in a specific segment.
Now, compare that long struggle in passenger jets with their total dominance in drones. It's a really fascinating contrast.
It is. The Chinese firm DJI commands almost 70% of the global commercial drone market.
And over 90% of the consumer market. It's an incredible monopoly. Why the difference?
The drone sector, while it's high-tech, it relies on a different set of components and a much faster innovation cycle than mainline aviation.
The barriers to entry were lower.
Much lower. DJI's dominance was built on rapid iteration, huge subsidies, automation, and critically total vertical integration of their supply chain. From the raw metals to the specialized avionics, they control it all.
Okay, and the sources also point out the dual-use nature of all this. The engine program for the C919, for instance.
It's run by a company that was jointly founded by the civilian aircraft maker, COMAC, and the military aircraft manufacturer. The pursuit of civilian self-reliance is inherently tied to military autonomy.
Which brings us to our final gap, high-end agricultural machinery. This seems less glamorous, but it's absolutely critical for food security.
For civilizational resilience in its most basic form, and despite serious concerns over food supply, they fell well short of their targets here.
The goal was a 60% domestic market share in high-end products.
And they missed it. Foreign brands like John Deere still hold 80% of that market, especially for the big, high-horsepower tractors.
And the reason for this persistent foreign dominance is really important.
It is, because it validates the priority of hard material quality. Even when farmers were offered subsidies to buy the domestic alternative, the local firms just couldn't match the reliability, the durability, and the sophisticated after-sales service networks of the established foreign brands.
So in this case, tangible attributes, quality, longevity, service, which are derived from decades of manufacturing IP and brand trust, they beat a subsidized national preference.
It's a powerful lesson. The necessity of reliable, sophisticated material production is paramount for securing your supply chains. Where that material mastery is incomplete, as in CNC components or high-end farm equipment, you remain vulnerable. You can't just mandate reliability. You have to earn it through industrial excellence.
Okay, so we've established the structural pressures forcing change, the trilemma, We've looked at the incredible successes in material production, like NEVs and energy.
And we've examined the persistent vulnerabilities where technological gaps remain.
So now we have to look at the global consequence of all this, an actively fragmented world.
The old system isn't just decaying, it's being deliberately taken apart and reassembled.
And the forces of weaponized interdependence and the adaptive responses to it are what's driving this fragmentation.
And that fragmentation really kicked into high gear with one specific event, the freezing of Russia's central bank reserves.
That moment acted as a catalyst.
It was a proof of concept. It demonstrated that the global financial networks were not neutral platforms, and that holding dollar-denominated assets could be weaponized overnight.
And the logical response to that threat is to build alternatives, to start a process of de-dollarization.
Exactly. We're seeing the active construction of parallel payment systems. The use of China's cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, has expanded significantly for settling trade in yuan.
It's an alternative messaging channel to SWIFT.
It gives states a way to trade and communicate financially without relying solely on systems that can be shut down by Western powers.
And the research points to even deeper, more technologically advanced bypass corridors. It mentions Project Enbridge. What is that?
Project Enbridge involves China, Thailand, the UAE, and Hong Kong. They're piloting the use of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, for cross-border payments.
So what does that do functionally?
It allows for instant, direct settlement between central banks without having to go through traditional correspondent banks in New York or London, which are the main choke points of the dollar system.
The goal is to create sanction-proof payment corridors.
The goal is explicitly that.
And we see the same fragmentation happening with physical trade, a massive supply chain rewiring.
We are shifting away from the old model of efficiency-seeking globalization, where you just built things wherever it was cheapest.
And moving towards security-driven regionalization, or what people are calling block alignment.
Policies like friendshoring or de-risking are not just buzzwords. They are aggressive, intentional government policies designed to physically move the production of pivotal goods.
Semiconductors, batteries, critical minerals.
Moving them to what are considered trusted geopolitical blocks. It is literally redrawing the economic map based on political allegiance, not on cost.
And this even extends down to the raw materials.
Yes, things like the U.S. Minerals Security Partnership. That's an initiative specifically designed to guarantee access to materials like lithium and cobalt by encouraging mining and processing outside of major suppliers like China. The focus is purely on security of supply, even if it costs more.
And the end result of all this is a sharp bifurcation.
Especially in high-tech industries. When you use strategic export controls on advanced semiconductors, you are forcing the world's innovation and production chains to split in two.
So major multinational companies now have to create different technology roadmaps, different products for different parts of the world.
One chip for one block, another chip for the other.
But this active fragmentation, it doesn't just create separation. It also redistributes power and leverage.
Yes, especially to what you might call swing states.
Countries are actively resisting this economic coercion. They see extraterritorial sanctions as a violation of their sovereign rights.
And you see this in the refusal of key global South players, India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, to fully align with Western sanctions against Russia.
Especially on energy exports.
India's behavior is the prime example here. They've maintained and even increased their imports of discounted Russian oil.
And they're sometimes bypassing the dollar by using their own currency, the rupee, for trade.
They are leveraging this new geopolitical environment to secure affordable energy for their massive population, despite any external pressure.
This maneuvering allows countries with strategic positions to extract what the research calls geopolitical rents.
Exactly. Being a middle power in this fragmented world gives you more leverage than you had in the old unipolar system.
So a country like Turkey can successfully trade with Russia while still being a NATO member.
And they benefit from it. They get cheaper oil and become a lucrative logistics hub, exploiting their geography.
And the Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are hedging their bets.
Deepening security ties with the U.S. while at the same time making huge economic and tech investments with China, they are refusing to be forced to choose a side.
And finally, the states that are targeted by these measures are developing their own sophisticated sanctions-proofing strategies.
They are not passive victims. Russia, since 2022, has developed a giant ecosystem of what you could call shadow imports,
using brokers in countries like Turkey, Central Asia, and the UAE.
to get their hands on embargoed Western technology through these incredibly intricate reshipment networks. It shows that if the demand for material goods is high enough, the supply chain will always find a way. It will create parallel routes.
And they're investing in new physical routes, too.
Yes, new trade corridors like the Middle Corridor across the Caspian Sea are getting significant investment. The explicit goal is to bypass the conventional choke points, like major sea lanes, that are considered vulnerable to Western intervention.
So we've come full circle. We've gone from the abstract theory of the security trilemma all the way to the concrete reality of supply chain control.
It seems the traditional rulebook of international relations, which was so dependent on those abstract legal frameworks, is just being overwritten by the hard realities of industrial capacity and physical leverage points.
So the countries that are best positioned to navigate this new era
Are the ones that can efficiently mobilize their national capacity to control vital supply chains and build tangible physical production capabilities.
This result-oriented approach, the one we saw with NEVs and energy, it gives real material weight to a state's capacity. Where that capacity is complete, you see new physical foundations being built for global interaction.
And where it's still developing, those gaps expose countries to the very weaponized interdependence that is actively fragmenting the old system.
The dynamic of weaponization and the strategic adaptation by both targeted states and these swing states, it just ensures the world is moving faster and faster toward a polycentric order.
The primary focus for states now is less about upholding abstract rules and much more on fostering genuine resilience through diversification and cultivating strategic economic ties across all of the emerging blocs.
So the ultimate takeaway here is that this fragmentation, it isn't chaos. It's a calculated, deliberate shift. A shift toward a multiplex global economic system where physical assets, the output of your factories, the capacity of your ports, your control of critical minerals are the supreme and lasting currency of power.